to know. Do-do-do-do-do-bum-ba. Well, the button says it's live. So, hello, everybody. How are you? Hey, Big Al and David Castle and Grandpa Brian. How are you doing? Pamela, David Castle, and let's see, Shelly. Good to see you. And I hope everyone is doing good. It's Wednesday, so at least that's what they tell us. And who knows for sure? How do we even know that this planet's called Earth? I mean, is there a sign out there in the universe that says Earth here? I don't know. Maybe they got another name for it. Who knows? Hello, Carol. Good to see you. Mr. I think it's Tufu. Good to see you as well. And Darth and Kaylee. And boy, good to see everybody. Just life is good. Big Al, what part of the country are you in? Still out in California? Crazy land, huh? Hey, Kent Cook. Hello. Coyote Prophet. Good to see you. Bree. Hello. Lost in Space. B3. Uh, Let me just invoke favor upon everybody. Nothing missing, nothing broken in your life. Favor meeting you coming in, favor meeting you going out, favor just surrounding you everywhere you go. You just got this shield, this favor shield. No weapon formed against you can prosper. Remember that. Hello, think agape, love, and always and forever. Love to see you. Great to see you, Susan. Hello. So, a little bit, happy birthday to those who are having one. Thank you to all of you who gave Lynn birthday wishes. She appreciated and said to tell you thank you. And we got something. We have a person in our community, Gaza. Many of you may know him, probably seen him. Let me bring this up. We're going to send some healing energy to this little guy. His name is Viker. And Viker is going in for surgery. He's a great, great kid. I mean, he is. This is his parents. Um, his mom and dad, Benji Mann and Emily Oliver. He has a tumor about the size of a lemon. He lives in Melbourne, Australia. And Gaza, we're just putting out healing thoughts to Viker and to mom and dad. When you see the life, and this is life, this is, folks, if adults could only get back there, Viker really shows what life's about. The joy of simply sitting in the sand at the beach. How many of you remember that? I remember as a kid going to the beach. It was a joy. It was the ultimate excitement. And Viker shows that pretty well here. And Viker, again, little guy, we're just sending you healing energy, love, favor. Let's see. So this is what they wrote. Tomorrow, our beautiful baby boy, Viker, will be having an operation on his brain to hopefully successfully remove a large tumor. It says, I'm reaching out to everyone in this time for your prayers, love, healing, vibes, everything and anything you can send for Viker. Please keep him in your thoughts tomorrow from about 12 p.m. onwards. So I'm not sure what that is, but it's 12 p.m. somewhere, and it is in my time zone. So um, no energy goes wasted. So, Viker, we appreciate you ever so much. There's a dad that loves his son. Look at that. I mean, yeah. So, when you just see Viker, you just in love, and mom and dad look like just two beautiful souls as well. So, folks, keep them in your thoughts. And Gaza, if you would just give us an update and let us know how he is doing. All right. Because, um, we're a community here and we reach out. That's why we don't strike back at others. That's why we always walk in that constant attitude of gratitude, of favor. And it situations like this, when your heart is at peace with yourself, the energy that you send out for others for healing, love, favor, that you want to see good things happening to them, that they prosper, that allows you to be a healer. And you can psychically heal. You can send healing. Listen, if the military can use psychic power to spy, et cetera, don't tell me that this doesn't work. I've been along on this planet long enough to know that it does work and it's powerful. So there we go. Um, we'll keep you updated as I'm updated. I am just thinking complete healing for Viker, and I believe he's going to come out stronger than ever. So, um, what else? Just looking at some of the comments. Trina has finally hit 1,000 subs. About time that we got behind her. Do the same thing with Brian, over at Milky Way Messengers. I think I got that right. Hey, Brandy, how you doing? So Nikola Tesla. Some interesting stories about our current president, his family, and Tesla. Rumors are that seems that Tesla's papers ended up into the Trump family's possession. I don't know. I haven't seen anything that would validate that or invalidate it. So I don't know. What we do know about Tesla is that he died alone. Um, some suspect foul play, some suspect it was our government. We know that his hotel room where he lived was ransacked. We know that his papers were missing. And so how do you put that together? Tesla was, I'm convinced, maybe not even of this earth, who knows? Um, we're going to read his autobiography and we're going to get an insight into this man that remained probably, one of the most enigmatic men around, above Einstein, above Freeman, above them all. Tesla shines the brightest. He had the way of understanding the universe in a way that, well, I don't think there's anyone alive today that has fully comprehended what he knew. He spent time right here in Colorado, right down outside Colorado Springs. In fact, when we were looking for our house, we actually looked at the house that Tesla built. And there was some strange things about that house. In fact, the realtor told us that, you know, about the story, the construction was a little different, and that, you know, we didn't expect that. You just found that the property was unique. He knew something. He knew a lot of something, and he wanted. I believe that he was. If there was a person who I could say that emanated what we would define or reference to a Christ consciousness, and that is really to me a love consciousness for humanity, something to better humanity with, it was Tesla. He wanted to give the world free energy. Well, you couldn't have that. The Rockefellers and the other oil titans that were um, ruling governments, that they still do, they did not want Tesla. No. Tesla was an enemy. He was a marked man, had a bounty on him, it is said. Why? Because he wanted to give free energy. And you think about this. We're going to get into it right now, but with Tesla, he realized that if everyone had use of free energy, guess what? you are much more freer than you can ever imagine. You don't have to pay to keep your house warm, your house cool. You don't have to pay to cook your food, to keep your food cold. There's just a number of things that if you had free, unlimited energy, imagine. Tesla saw us using light vehicles because that's how it works. It's there. We just don't have the technology, or at least they say we don't, of how to convert that energy. And so let's get right into it. This is a cool book. This is called The Wall of Light, Nikola Tesla and the Venusian spaceships, the X-12. You gotta love this, man. Give me 1 second here. I want to, in fact, let me, there we go. And let me do this one. There we go. So, yeah, I'm driving the bus, folks, and it's all right. I know where we're going. This is called The Wall of Light. This is going to be a fun story. Let's read. There's Tesla. Fine dapper of a man, is he not? Yeah. And here he is. A different life, but the same man. Right before his death, too. So let's get right into this. And I'm going to pull this up for those who want to read along. And if you ever want, this document is on PDF. So, how did the world's greatest inventor invent? How did he carry out an invention? What sort of mentality did this wonder man have? Was his early life as commonplace as most boys? What was the early training of this man from space? Was he an Earthman? Did he come from the planet Venus? Was he born on a spaceship? The answer to these and many other questions will be found in this story from the lips of the man himself. In this autobiography concerning his early youth and so on, we obtain a good insight into the wonderful life this man led. It reads like a fairy tale, but strange as it may be, it is true. Tesla was no common mortal. He led a charmed life, given up by doctors at least 3 times as dead. He was a young man at 60 and at 70, with a brain just as keen the day he died. If he did die, for many believe he did not. He always said he would live to the age of 150. So perhaps he is alive on Venus. That might be easy to believe now, for if man can build a rocket to the moon or Venus, there's no reason to doubt that science on that planet could be thousands of years ahead of Earthman's. We know that spaceships have landed on Earth all through the ages. Tesla said that he believed he came from the planet Venus. And during the landing of a spaceship on my property, the members of that ship said that Tesla was a child from Venus. Tesla will tell you in his own words what he believed. Read the story with care. There is a lot between the lines, as you will see. He had one great vice, his generosity. He was an idealist of the highest order, and to such men, money itself means but little. Chapter 1. My early life. The progressive development of man is vitally dependent on invention. It is the most important product of his creative brain. Its ultimate purpose is to complete mastery of mind over the material world, the harnessing of the forces of nature to human needs. This is the difficult task of the inventor, who is often misunderstood and unrewarded. But he finds ample compensation in the pleasing exercises of his powers and in the knowledge of being one of the exceptionally privileged class without whom the race would have long ago perished in the bitter struggle against pitiless elements. Speaking for myself, I have already had more than my full measure of this exquisite enjoyment. So much that for many years my life was little short of continuous rapture. I am credited with being one of the hardest workers, and perhaps I am, if thought is the equivalent of labor, for I have devoted it almost all of my waking hours. But if work is interpreted to be a definite performance in a specified time according to a rigid rule, then I may be the worst idlers. Every effort under compulsion demands a sacrifice of life energy. I never paid such a price. On the contrary, I have thrived on my thoughts. In attempting to give a connected and faithful account of my activities in this story of my life, I must dwell, however reluctantly, on the impressions of my youth and the circumstances and events which have been instrumental in determining my career. Our first endeavors are purely instinctive, prompting of an imagination vivid and undisciplined. As we grow older, reason asserts itself, and we become more and more systematic and designing. But those early impulses, though not immediately productive, are of the greatest moment and may shape our very destinies. Indeed, I feel now that I had understood and cultivated instead of suppressing them. I would have added substantially value to my bequest to the world. But not until I had attempted manhood did I realize that I was an inventor. This was due to a number of causes. In the first place, I had a brother who was gifted to an extraordinary degree, one of those rare phenomena of mentality which biological investigation has failed to explain. His premature death left my earth parents desolated, disconsolidated, excuse me. I will explain my remark about my earth parents later. We owned a horse which had been presented to us by a dear friend. It was a magnificent animal of Arabian breed, possessed of almost human intelligence, and was cared for and petted by the whole family. Having on one occasion saved my father's life under remarkable circumstances. My father had been called one winter night to perform an urgent duty, and while crossing the mountains infested with wolves, the horse became frightened and ran away, throwing him violently to the ground. It arrived home bleeding and exhausted, but after the alarm was sounded, immediately dashed off again, returning to the spot. And before the searching party were far on the way, they were met by my father, who had recovered consciousness and remounted, not realizing that he had been lying in snow for several hours. This horse was responsible for my brother's injuries from which he died. I witnessed the tragic scene, and although so many years have elapsed since, my visual impression of it has lost none of its force. The recollection of his attainments made every effort of mine seem dull in comparison. Anything I did that was credible merely caused my parents to feel their loss more keenly. So I grew up with little confidence in myself. As I have referred, these were perhaps my strangest and inexplicable experiences. They usually occur when I found myself in a dangerous or distressing situation or when I was greatly exhilarated. In some instances, I have seen all the air around me filled with tongues of living flame. Their intensity, instead of diminishing, increased with time and seemingly attained a maximum when I was about 25 years old. Where else have we ever heard about tongues of living flame appearing over people? Second chapter of Acts, yeah. While in Paris in 1863, a prominent French manufacturer sent me an invitation to a shooting expedition, which I accepted. I had been long confined to the factory, and the fresh air had a wonderful, invigorating effect on me. On my return to the city that night, I felt a positive sensation that my brain had caught fire. I saw a light as though through a small sun, which was located in it, and I passed the whole night applying cold compresses on my tortured head. Finally, the flashes diminished in frequency and force, but it took more than 3 weeks before they wholly subsided. When a second invitation was extended to me, my answer was emphatic no. These luminous phenomena still manifest themselves from time to time as when a new idea opening up possibilities strikes me, but they are no longer exciting, being of relatively small intensity. When I close my eyes, I invariably observe first a background of very dark and uniform blue, not unlike the sky on a clear but starless night. In a few seconds, this field becomes animated with innumerable scintillating flecks of green, arranged in several layers and advancing towards me. Then there appears to the right a beautiful pattern of two symbols of parallel and closely spaced lines at right angles to one another in all sorts of colors with yellow, green, and gold predominating. Immediately thereafter, the lines grow brighter and the whole is thickly sprinkled with dots of twinkling light. This picture moves slowly across the field of vision and in about 10 seconds vanishes on the left, leaving behind a ground of rather unpleasant and inert gray, which quickly gives way to a billowy sea of clouds, seemingly trying to mold themselves into living shapes. It is curious that I cannot project a form into this gray until the second phase is reached. Every time before falling asleep, images of persons or objects flit before my view. When I see them, I know I am about to lose consciousness. If they are absent and refuse to come, it means a sleepless night. To what an extent imagination played a part in my early life, I may illustrate by another odd experience. Like most children, I was fond of jumping and developing an intense desire to support myself in the air. Occasionally, a strong wind, richly charged with oxygen, blew from the mountains, rendering my body light as cork. And then I would leap and float in space for a long time. It was a delightful sensation, and my disappointment was keen when later I under deceived myself. Interesting term. Under deceived, deceived. Yeah, yeah. During that period, I contracted many strange likes, dislikes, and habits, some of which can trace to external impressions, while others are unaccountable. I had a violent aversion against the earrings of women, but earrings of women, but other ornaments as bracelets pleased me more or less according to design. That's odd. The sight of a pearl would almost give me a fit. but I was fascinated with the glitter of crystals or objects with sharp edges and plain surfaces. I would not touch the hair of other people except perhaps at the point of a revolver. I would get a favor by looking at a peach, and if a piece of camber was anywhere in the house, it caused me the keenest discomfort. Even now, I am not insensible to some of these upsetting impulses. When I drop little squares of paper in a dish filled with liquid, I always sense a peculiar and awful taste in my mouth. I counted the steps in my walks and calculated the cubical contents of soup plates, coffee cups, and pieces of food. Otherwise, my meal was unenjoyable. All repeated acts or operations I performed had to be divisible by 3, and if I missed, I felt impelled to do it all over again, even if it took hours. Up to the age of 8 years, my character was weak and vacillating. I had neither courage nor strength to form a firm resolve. My feelings came in waves and surges and vibrated unceasingly between extremes. Oh, folks, man, talk about reading between the lines. Wow. I've never read any human doing this when you read their lives, their autobiographies. Hmm. My feelings came in waves and surges and vibrated unceasingly between extremes. My wishes were of consuming force, and like the heads of the Hydra, they multiplied. I was obsessed by thoughts of pain and life and death and religious fear. I was swayed by superstitious belief and lived in constant dread of the spirit of evil, of ghosts or orgs or other unholy monsters of the dark. Then, all at once, there orgs and other unholy monsters of the dark, all of them at once, there came a tremendous change which altered the course of my whole existence. Of all things, I liked books best. My father had a large library, and whenever I could manage, I tried to satisfy my passion for reading. He did not permit it and would fly into a rage when he caught me in the act. He hid the candles when he found that I was reading in secret. He did not want to spoil my eyes, but I obtained tallow, made the wicking, and cast the sticks into tin forms. And every night I would bush the keyhole, and the cracks and read off until dawn, when all others slept and my mother started on her arduous daily task. On one occasion, I came across a novel entitled uh, Eafi, the son of Abba, a Siberian translation of a well-known Hungarian writer, Joska. This work somehow awakened my dormant powers of will, and I began to practice self-control. At first, my resolutions faded like snow in April, but in a little while, I conquered my weaknesses and I felt pleasure I had never knew before, that of doing as I willed. In the course of time, this vigorous mental exercise became second to nature. At the onset, my wishes had to be subdued, but gradually desire and will grew to be identical. After years of such discipline, I gained so complete a mastery over myself that I toyed with passions, which have meant destruction to some of the strongest men. At a certain age, I contracted a mania for gambling, which greatly worried my parents. To sit down to a game of cards was for me the quintessence of pleasure. My father led an exemplary life, and could not excuse the senseless waste of time and money in which I had indulged. I had a strong resolve, but my philosophy was bad. I would say to him, I can stop whenever I please, but it is worthwhile to give up that which I would purchase with the joys of paradise? On frequent occasions, he gave vent to his anger and contempt, but my mother was different. She understood the character of men and knew that one's salvation could only be brought about through his own efforts. One afternoon, I remember, when I had lost all my money and was craving for a game, she came to me with a roll of bills and said, "Go and enjoy yourself. The sooner you lose all we possess, the better it will be. I know that you will get over it." She was right. I conquered my passion then and there, and only regretted that it had not been 100 times as strong. I not only vanquished any craving, but tore it from my heart so as not to leave even a trace of desire. Ever since that time, I have been as indifferent to any form of gambling as to picking teeth. This is interesting verbiage. During another period, I smoked excessively, threatening to ruin my health. Then my will asserted itself, and I not only stopped, but I destroyed all inclination. Long ago, I suffered from heart trouble until I discovered that it was due to the innocent cup of coffee I consumed every morning. I discontinued at once. Lo, I confess it was not an easy task. In this way, I checked and bridled other habits and passions, and have not only preserved my life, but derived an immense amount of satisfaction from what most men would consider privation and sacrifice. After finishing the studies at the Politic Institute and University, I had a complete nervous breakdown. And while the malady lasted, I observed many phenomena, strange and unbelievable. Wow. Chapter 2. I shall dwell briefly on these extraordinary experiences on account of their possible interest to students of psychology and physiology, and also because this period of agony was one of the greatest consequences on my mental development and subsequent labors. But it is indispensable to first relate the circumstances and conditions which preceded them, and in which might be found their partial explanation. From childhood, I was compelled to concentrate attention upon myself. This caused me much suffering, but to my present view, it was a blessing in disguise, for it has taught me to appreciate the inestimable value of introspection in the preservation of life, as well as a means of achievement. This pressure of occupation and the insistent stream of impressions poured into our consciousness through all the gateways of knowledge makes modern existence hazardous in many ways. Most persons are so absorbed in the contemplation of the outside world that they are wholly oblivious to what is passing on within themselves. The premature death of millions is primarily traceable to this cause. Even among those who exercise care, it is a common mistake to avoid imagery and ignore the real dangers. And what is true of an individual also applies more or less to a people as a whole. Abstinence was not always my liking, but I find ample reward in the agreeable experience I am now making, just in the hope of converting sane to my precepts and convictions. I will recall one or two. A short time ago, I was returning to my hotel. It was a bitter cold night. the ground slippery, and no taxi to be had. Half a block behind me followed another man, evidently as anxious as myself to get under cover. Suddenly, my legs went up in the air, and at the same instant, there was a flash in my brain. The nerves responded, the muscles contracted. I swung through 180 degrees and landed on my hands. I resumed my walk as though nothing had happened when the stranger caught up to me. "How old are you?" he asked, surveying me critically. "Oh, about 59, I replied. "What of it?" "Well," said he, "I've seen a cat do this, but never a man. About a month ago, I wanted to order new eyeglasses and went to an occultist who put me through the usual test. Oculus, excuse me, occultist. Yeah, you know where my mind goes. He looked at me incredulously as I read off with ease the smallest print at considerable distance. But when I told him I was past 60, he gasped in astonishment. Friends of mine often remarked that my suits fit me like gloves, but they do not know that all my clothing is made to measurements which were taken nearly 15 years ago and never changed. During this same period, my weight has not varied 1 pound. In this connection, I may tell a funny story. One evening in the winter of 1885, Mr. Edison, Edward H. Johnson, and the president of Edison Illuminating Company, Mr. Batchelor, manager of the works, and myself entered a little place opposite 65th Avenue, where the offices of the company were located. Someone suggested guessing weights, and I was induced to step on a scale. Edison felt me all over and said Tesla weighs 152 pounds to an ounce, and he guessed it exactly. Stripped, I weighed 142 pounds, and that is still my weight. I whispered to Mr. Johnson, "How is it possible that Edison could guess my weight so closely?" "Well," he said, lowering his voice, "I will tell you confidentially, but you must not say anything. He was employed for a long time in a Chicago slaughterhouse where he weighed thousands of hogs each day. That's why." Mr. Friend, the Honorable Chancery M. Dupay, tells of an Englishman on whom he sprang once of his original antidotes and who listened with a puzzled expression, but a year later laughed out loud. I will frankly confess it took me longer than that to appreciate Johnson's joke. Now, my well-being is simply the result of a careful and measured mode of living. And perhaps the most astonishing thing is that 3 times in my youth, I was rendered by illness a hopeless physical wreck and given up by physicians. More than this, through ignorance and lightheartedness, I got into all sorts of difficulty, dangers, and scrapes from which I extricated myself as by enchantment. I was almost drowned a dozen times, was nearly boiled alive, and just missed being cremated. I was entombed, lost, and frozen. I had hairbreadth escapes from mad dogs, hogs, and other wild animals. I passed through dreadful diseases and met all kinds of odd mishaps, and that I am hale and hearty today seems like a miracle. But as I recall these incidents of my mind, I feel convinced that my preservation was not altogether accidental, but was indeed the work of divine power. An inventor's endeavor is essentially life-saving, whether he harnesses forces, improves devices, or provides new comforts and conveniences. He is aiding to the safety of our existence. He is also better qualified than the average individual to protect himself in peril, for he is observant and resourceful. If I had no other evidence that I was, in a measure, possessed of such qualities, I would find it in these personal experiences. The reader will be able to judge for himself if I mention one or two incidences. On one occasion, when I was about 14 years old, I wanted to scare some friends who were bathing with me. My plan was to dive under a long floating structure and slip out quietly at the other end. Swimming and diving came to me as naturally as to a duck, and I was confident that I could perform the feat. Accordingly, I plunged into the water and, when out of view, turned around and proceeded rapidly towards the opposite side. Thinking that I was safely beyond the structure, I rose to the surface, but to my dismay, struck a beam. Of course, I quickly dived and forged ahead with rapid strokes until my breath was beginning to give out. Rising for the second time, my head came again in contact with a beam. Now I was becoming desperate. However, summoning all my energy, I made a third frantic attempt, but the result was the same. The torture of suppressed breathing was getting unendurable. My brain was reeling, and I felt myself sinking. At that moment, when my situation seemed hopeless, I experienced one of those flashes of light, and the structure above me appeared before my vision. I either discerned or guessed that there was a little space between the surface of the water and the boards resting on the beam. And with consciousness nearly gone, I floated up, pressed my mouth close to the planks, and managed to inhale a little air, unfortunately mingled with a spray of water which nearly choked me. Several times I repeated this procedure as in a dream until my heart, which was racing at a terrible rate, give me a second here, quieted down and I gained composure. After that, I made a number of unsuccessful dives, having completely lost the sense of direction, but finally succeeded in getting out of the trap when my friends had already given me up and were fishing for my body. That bathing season was spoiled for me through recklessness, but I soon forgot the lesson, and only 2 years later, I fell into a worse predicament. There was a large flour mill with a dam across the river near the city where I was studying at the time. As a rule, the height of the water was only 2 or 3 inches above the dam, and to swim to it was a sport not very dangerous, in which I often indulged. One day I went alone to the river to enjoy myself as usual. When I was a short distance from the masonry, however, I was horrified to observe that the water had risen and was carrying me along swiftly. I tried to get away, but it was too late. Luckily, though, I saved myself from being swept over by taking hold of the wall with both hands. The pressure against my chest was great, and I was barely able to keep my head above the surface. Not a soul was in sight, and my voice was lost in the roar of the fall. Slowly and gradually, I became exhausted and unable to withstand the strain any longer. Just as I was about to let go, to be dashed against the rocks below, I saw in a flash of light a familiar diagram illustrating the hydraulic principle that the pressure of the fluid in motion is proportionate to the area exposed, and automatically I turned on my left side. As if by magic, the pressure was reduced, and I found it comparatively easy in that position to resist the force of the stream, but the danger still confronted me. I knew that sooner or later I would be carried over the dam, as it was not possible for any help to reach me in time, even if I had attracted attention. I am ambidextrous now, but then I was left-handed and comparatively little strength in my right arm. For this reason, I did not dare to turn on the other side to rest, and nothing remained but to slowly push my body along the dam. I had to get away from the mill towards which my face was turned, as the current there was much swifter and deeper. Wow, it was a long and painful ordeal, and I came near to failing at the very end, for I was confronted with a depression in the masonry. I managed to get over with the last ounce of strength and fell in a swoon when I reached the bank, where I was found. I had torn virtually all the skin from my left side, and it took several weeks before the fever had subsided and I was well. These are only two of the many instances, but they may be sufficient to show that had it not been for the inventor's instinct, I would not have lived to tell the tale. Interested people have often asked me, and when did I begin to invent? This is all I can answer from my present recollection, in the light of which the first attempt, I recall, was rather ambitious, for it involved the invention of an apparatus and a method. In the former, I was anticipated, but the latter was original. It happened in this way with my playmates that had come into the possession of a hook and a fishing tackle, which created quite an excitement in the village. And the next morning, all started out to catch frogs. I was left alone and deserted wing to a quarrel with this boy. I had never seen a real hook and pictured it as something wonderful. Oh, I get it. Endowed with particular qualities, and was despairing not to be one of the party. Urged by necessity, I somehow got hold of a piece of the soft iron wire, hammered the end to a sharp point between the two stones, bent it into shape, and fastened it to a strong string. I then cut a rod, gathered some bait, and went down to the brook where there were frogs in abundance. But I could not catch any, and was almost discouraged when it occurred to me to dangle the empty hook in front of the frog sitting on a stump. At first, he collapsed, but by and by his eyes bulged out and became bloodshot. He swelled to twice his normal size and made a vicious snap at the hook. Immediately, I pulled him up. I tried the same thing again and again, and the method proved infallible. When my comrades, who in spite of their fine outfit had caught nothing, came to me, they were green with envy. For a long time, I kept my secret and enjoyed the monopoly, but finally yielded to the spirit of Christmas. Well, there we go. Every boy could then do the same, and the following summer brought disastrous to the frogs. I bet it did. This is an interesting story about this character. Amazing. Now we got a couple of minutes. I'll continue on. When I vision Tesla, I don't envision this, but it's quite interesting to see how this lad grew up. And come to find out, folks, he's a lot like us. So if he's from Venus, well, then they learn things just like we did. In my next attempt, I seem to have acted under the first instinctive impulse, which later dominated me, to harness the energies of nature to the service of man. I did this through the medium of May bugs, or June bugs, as they are called in America, which were a veritable pest in that country and sometimes broke the branches of trees by the sheer weight of their bodies. So do cicadas. The bushes were black with them. I could attach as many as 4 of them to a crosspiece, rotably arranged on a thin spindle, and transmit the motion of the same to a large disc and so derive considerable power. These creatures were remarkably efficient. For once they were started, they had no sense to stop and continued whirling for hours and hours. And the hotter it was, the harder they worked. All went well until a strange boy came to the place. He was the son of a retired officer in the Austrian army. That urchin ate maybugs alive and enjoyed them as though they were the finest blue-pointed oysters. That disgusting sight terminated my endeavors in this promising field, and I have never since been able to touch a maybug or any other insect for that matter. You know, when I was growing up in Santa Clara, there was a kid, I still remember his name. His name was Dwayne. Um, that kid was crazy, and he licked worms. And then my smaller brother started licking worms. Yeah. So I can dig what Tesla is saying here, but remarkable what he found in the way of energy with a June bug. Huh. After that, I believed I undertook to take apart and assemble the clocks of my grandfather. In the former operation, I was always successful, but often failed in the latter. So it came that he brought my work to a sudden halt in a manner not too delicate, and it took 30 years before I tackled another clockwork again. It's a lesson here. I mean, you can see how many times, I mean, there's a proverb that says, do not depress, do not diminish the spirit of a child. And you could use the modern vernacular, crush a child. And what I learned, and obviously Tesla did too, and many of you know this as well, it wasn't so much, for me, the beatings, it was the verbal abuse, the verbal tearing down. How many of you have heard, you'll never amount to anything? And then you have the opposite to those children who were raised up in a thriving home where they were told there was nothing they could not do. Now, each has challenges, but I can really relate to what Tesla is saying here. Shortly thereafter, I went into manufacture of a kind of pop gun, which comprised of a hollow tube, a piston, and two plugs of hemp. When firing the gun, the piston was pressed against the stomach and the tube was pushed back quickly with both hands. The air between the plugs was compressed and raised to a higher temperature, and one of them was expelled with a loud report. The art consisted of selecting a tube of paper, a proper taper from the hollow stalks, which were found in our garden. I did very well with that gun, but my activities interfered with the window panes of our house and met with painful discouragement. Of course, classic, kid playing baseball, right? Baseball goes through the kitchen window. What do you expect? If I remember rightly, I then took to carving swords from pieces of furniture, which I could conveniently obtain. At that time, I was under the sway of the Siberian national poetry and full of admiration for the feats of the heroes. I used to spend hours in mowing down my enemies in the form of corn stalks, which ruined the crops and netted me several spankings from my mother. Moreover, these were not the formal kind, but the genuine article. This kid was always getting in trouble. Wow. How did he figure out the keys of the universe? I'm still, amazed at this. I had all this and more behind me before I was 6 years old and had passed through 1 year of elementary school in the village of Simlin, I think that's Simlingen, where my family lived. At this juncture, we moved to the little city of Gospic nearby. This change of residence was like a calamity to me. It almost broke my heart to be part from our pigeons, chickens, and sheep, and our magnificent flock of geese, which used to rise to the clouds in the morning and return from the feeding grounds at sundown in a battle formation so perfect that it would have been a squadron of the best aviators of the present day to shame. In our new house, I was but a prisoner, watching the strange people I saw through the window blinds. My bashfulness was such that I would rather have faced a roaring lion than one of the city dudes who strolled about. However, my hardest trial came on Sunday when I had to dress up and attend the service. There I met with an accident, the mere thought of which made my blood curdle like sour milk for years afterwards. It was my second adventure in a church. This is going to be interesting. Not long before, I was entombed for a night in an old chapel on an inaccessible mountain, which was visited only once a year. It was an awful experience, but this one was worse. There was a wealthy lady in town, a good but pompous woman, who used to come to the church grossly painted up and attired with enormous train and attendants. One Sunday, I had just finished ringing the bell in the belfry and rushed downstairs when this grand dame was sweeping out and I jumped on her train. It tore off with a ripping noise, which sounded like a salvo of musketries fired in by raw recruits. My father was livid with rage. He gave me a gentle slap on the cheek, the only corporeal punishment he ever administered me, but I can almost feel it now. The embarrassment and confusion that follow are indescribable. I was practically ostracized until something else happened, which redeemed me in the estimation of the community. All right, we'll break it off there. Okay, that's kind of cool. I don't know about you if you've enjoyed it, but this is not what I expected out of Tesla. This is not what I expected, but yet it is so down to earth, so real. You can actually see it happening. I mean, we've all done stupid stuff, as kids. I remember I got a chemistry set, and this was back when they actually put real chemicals in there. And my brother was sick, and I discovered how you could make a stink bomb. Well, what I didn't realize is that my brother had a reaction to that. And yeah, uh, it is an interesting book. I'm just reading some of that. It's very odd. If you want it, I'll be more than happy to send it to you. Um, Tesla, his mind. As I'm reading here, yeah, Twisted Isby, you really identify with this man now, and you can tell that he was philanthropic in his views from a very early age. He wanted to benefit mankind. I don't know about you, but that almost sounds mission orientated, doesn't it? Yeah, he feels like a normal person. Yeah, he really does. You know, we're going to read this. I think this is going to be a fun one to read the whole book. I mean, yeah, it may go for a couple of days, but so what? This guy, when did he begin to see these equations? I think he's going to tell us. And he was a working stiff. He was, worked in factories. Now he may have been an inventor, but the dude would be as blue collar as anyone today. That tells me he was more of a human being than someone who grew up as an elitist, you know. Um, Thank you, Miss Lori. Good to preach. Thank you. Hello, Lucky. How are you doing? Good to see you. Well, anyway, we're going to continue on with this tomorrow. It's just cool. It just really is. Um, who knows what maybe he left for us. The guy was, I don't think, of this planet. I don't think he was of the same nature of many of us were. He was a little different, but he was very much the same. So I wonder if by reading his words, could that trigger something that he left behind? I know it's just it's an imaginative thought, but listen, isn't that the same thing the Bible does? Isn't it the same thing the Quran does? That's what they teach. They teach you to read it over and over and over again. Why? Because it's code. The more you read it, the more the code gets, into you. Wow, that's interesting. That is really interesting. Um, anyway, all right, folks. Well, thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know. I'm fascinated now. My appetite has been, it's like, okay, now I got to find out, what did he discover? And I'm getting over the fact that he was dealing with, you know, June bugs and then other natural things in nature, seeing the force of nature, energy. I mean, the spinning disc, there's things he's telling us here, and how the earth, this is quite, I think we're going to have a great time with this. Hey, Peter, good to see you. Bree, all right, everyone. Thank you. See you tomorrow. Be good to yourself. Folks, I'm telling you, we're learning something here. Again, if you can't forgive yourself, how in the world are you ever going to forgive anyone else? If you don't forgive yourself, no one else will either. It kind of, you attract that which of it. So forgive yourself, love yourself, and then go out and start spreading it in the world. All right. Much love. Hey, Spirit Girl, how are you, my dear? Good to see you, and all the rest of you. Robert V, good to see you as well. Thank you all for tuning in. Pamela, and all the rest of everybody. If I didn't get your name, well, I'm thinking it now. There we go. All right. I'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.